Brought to you by the Soska sisters, the people who created American Mary, a movie about a Canadian woman named Catherine. 2019's Rabid is a remake and reimagining of David Cronenberg's classic 1997 movie that never actually existed because the 70s never happened. Beginning with a woman named Rose on a moped and having a bit of a woman driver moment and almost causing a fatal crash, we see that Rose is a fashion designer who is unliked by her boss and everyone around her due to some slight facial scarring caused by an accident as a child. Her boss Gunter scolds her for almost getting run over on the way to work, in the process getting all of his employees to laugh directly to her face for it, because when you stop and think about it, it's actually kind of hilarious. While at work, she's invited on a date by her colleague Brad, a photographer, as he asks her if she'd like to attend the after party of one of Gunter's shows tonight. And just after talking to Brad, she's talking to another colleague, Chelsea, a person who she grew up with and lived with after being taken in by her family, due to her entire family being killed in the accident that slightly scarred her. They then proceed to talk about how Rose is a vegetarian, and that she can't stand the thought of eating something that was once alive, in perhaps the least subtle showing of foreshadowing I think I've ever witnessed. That evening, she arrives at the after party, and after having a little bit of trouble being granted access to the venue, despite her being the one who created the guest list, eventually she's let in, where Brad proceeds to almost immediately kiss her out of nowhere, despite showing almost zero romantic interest in her previously, because he likes to keep them on the edge. Am I going to make out with you, or am I going to completely ignore you? Who knows? Not even I know. While in the bathroom, as apparently kissing a man gives her the extreme and sudden urge to urinate, she hears the Soska sisters, as they cameo in their own movie, talk about how Chelsea had actually asked Brad to invite Rose to the party, instead of Brad doing it out of genuine interest, because if there's anything we know about guys, they're disgusted by slight and almost invisible scars. After confronting Chelsea about it and having an argument, she storms out of the venue and rides away on her moped, before forgetting about the most basic rule of road safety. Look where you're going. She's absolutely obliterated by a truck and wakes up days later in the hospital with her entire face and body covered in bandages because she's so hideously ugly that no one can stand to look at her. A doctor then walks in and proceeds to ask her if she can remember what happened, before immediately telling her not to talk in some kind of weird power trip or something, and tells her that she's been unconscious for a week. Her jaw has been so badly damaged by the accident that they couldn't reattach the entire thing, forcing them to wire it completely shut because she talks too much. Not only did she discover that her face was not quite an immovable object when met with an unstoppable force, otherwise known as a motor vehicle, but her abdomen was also punctured by her own bike, causing a large amount of her intestines to be ripped out from her body and to be thrown out onto the street like some kind of strange spaghetti bolognese. She asks to remove the bandages, and much to her shock and horror, underneath she discovers an ugly person. And to pour salt on the wound, she's then told that she's lost her job with Gunter because the fashion world is extremely competitive, and she also looks kind of weird. Chelsea, who's been at her side the entire week, is a genuine friend to Rose, and thought she was being helpful by setting her up with Brad. So after apologizing for causing all of this, they make up, and Rose agrees to live with her while she recovers. After being discharged from the hospital and being sent home to Chelsea's house, while alone, she begins to have a little bit of a cry while looking at the large surgical scar on her torso, before proceeding to remove her facial bandages, as I guess she wants to cry some more. Trying to acclimate to her new life of looking like a squished meatball, with no way to actually open her mouth to consume food, she's forced to blend it all up and inject it through a small hole in her jaw, as that's the only way she's able to consume things. And by that, I mean that's the only way she's able to consume things theoretically, as most of the time she's too busy dribbling it down her own face and choking on it like a really ugly toddler. While checking her emails, she sees that she has one from Brad saying that he's not been able to stop thinking about her and her funny looking face since the accident, before noticing that she has another email from a Burroughs clinic. Attached is a video explaining what they have to offer. Transhumanism, the ability for humans to evolve, because right now we're gross squishy creatures. By donating her blood to their research, she'll be given a lifetime of free medical coverage, as well as the chance to be first in line for their new medical breakthroughs. So they're going to take your blood and turn you into their guinea pigs, but at least you won't be left in crippling debt. So after some hesitation, she arrives at the clinic with Chelsea while doing her best Invisible Man cosplay, before she's then examined by Dr. Burroughs himself, the man who the clinic was named after, because his ego was simply that big. A doctor who seems to look a bit too happy while staring at someone whose face is still on the floor outside of that club somewhere. He tells her that she's a perfect candidate for what they have to offer: stem cell manipulation, a treatment where they manipulate the stem cells into performing sexual favors for them. She's hesitant hesitant to go ahead with the procedure, but considering her other option is to go the rest of her life looking like Gary Busey, she accepts the free treatment. And almost immediately, the procedure begins, as we see that they put the all-magical Vaseline on her face, and then they're done. The next day, Brad comes to visit her, as once again her face is entirely covered with bandages, as they really can't stand the way she looks. But as she's still unconscious from the magical Vaseline face rub, he drops her off some flowers and leaves, before being pulled aside by Dr. Burrows to talk about Rose. Eventually, Rose does wake up from her procedure, and begins to remove the bandages to discover that her face and chest are completely healed. Not only is the damage from the accident gone, but the damage from the previous accident is gone as well. And not long after waking up, while inspecting herself in the mirror, she begins to feel unwell as her stomach begins to gurgle, when suddenly her facial expression completely changes, and she leaves the room. Finding a man alone in the pool, she proceeds to walk into it clothed and directly up to him, where we learn that his name is Dom, and he's a famous TV actor who's been here for a treatment. She starts kissing him, as making out with random men in swimming pools is always a fun activity, before getting a little too enthusiastic about the entire thing, and biting a chunk out of his lip and fleeing, as she's stolen a bit of his face to add to her collection. After running away because she doesn't like it when men bleed, she wakes up in her bed at the hospital, thinking that it was all just a dream where she was slightly hungry. Dr. Burrows proceeds to tell her that there are some side effects to the treatment that he's already performed without first disclosing said side effects, because being ethically right is simply a waste of time. So he gives her some medication as well as some food supplements to help with the healing process, but tells her that whenever she's feeling tired, she must rest or she could become unwell. After being discharged with a piece of Dom's face still stuck between her teeth, she returns to Chelsea's house, where she proceeds to continue designing clothes again, but this time for herself and not for Gunter. And that night, despite quite literally just being discharged after a major Vaseline surgery, she proceeds to go to the club with Chelsea, where she crosses paths with Gunter, who apparently likes to discriminate against the facially challenged, as he immediately offers her a job again because she's no longer an uggo. After dancing and drinking all night, we then see her take a man into the back of the club, where she then proceeds to slice open his guts to make sure he's actually human and not one of those pesky government spying androids. And after biting into his neck, just like her experience with Dom at the clinic, she then wakes up in bed as if it was all just a dream, shortly followed by us learning that it was in fact not all just a dream, as we then see Dom on set while he's profusely sweating while trying to get ready for a scene. He proceeds to get a little too physical with one of his co-stars, causing her pain, before losing his temper with another actor and throwing him to the ground, before biting large chunks out of his cheeks because he really likes the way they taste. After giving the man an aggressive love bite, the rest of the team attempts to restrain the now extremely aggressive Dom, as we see that Rose has once again begun to feel her stomach pains. She falls to the floor in agony and begins screaming out in pain as she's experiencing the average period cramp. But it turns out that it was just a big poo, as she then wakes up after losing consciousness and drowns one of her food supplement drinks. Still hungry, she starts rummaging around in Chelsea's fridge for something to eat, but her usual fruits and vegetables just don't seem appealing to her right now, as she realizes that she's in fact not part bunny rabbit. She finds a pack of meat that Chelsea had bought, and like the average carnivore diet enthusiast, proceeds to tear her way into the packaging and begins drinking all of the blood out of it, before puking it all up because that's kind of gross, Rose. After having a bit of a panic about the whole vampiric urge thing, she seems to suddenly calm down and proceeds to leave the house. She comes across a man getting kicked out of a bar before beginning to harass a random woman, which he then proceeds to swear at when his rather gentlemanlike flirting techniques don't seem to do the trick. Rose follows him back to his car and asks for a ride, where she then proceeds to start biting his hand and then his neck, before once again waking up in bed as if it was all just a really weird wet dream, except this dream was wet because she's still covered in his blood. Back at the hospital, we see the man who Dom attacked, much like Dom himself, has gone completely rabid and proceeds to bite the fingers off a nurse because he's really hungry for some sausages. After repeatedly cracking her head against the floor to try and find out what's inside, he then attacks and starts biting two of the orderlies who attempt to stop him before smashing his own head through a window after forgetting about the basic concept of glass and things passing through it. After getting back to work after her unfortunate accident of becoming ugly, Gunter looks at what Rose has been drawing and immediately wants to create one of her designs to close out his show, something that Rose has spent her entire professional career attempting to do. Who knew the secret to life was just being pretty? But things have gotten worse at the hospital, as they're now suspecting that it's an advanced hyper-aggressive strain of rabies, as the doctors look over Dom as he's convulsing, foaming at the mouth and bleeding from the eyes, until anyone attempts to get close to him, which causes him to spring up and become extremely violent, like an incel at the thought of a girl rejecting him. Brad, still attempting to make things up to Rose, approaches her at work and asks her out for a dinner, which she accepts. And while at the restaurant, he then reaches his hand out to touch her face, as apparently he's quite the toucher of faces, when suddenly Rose's stomach starts to gurgle, and she bites her own tongue. After excusing herself to the bathroom after almost licking Brad's fingers, she looks in the mirror to see that she has spikes growing out of her lips and something protruding from beneath her tongue, as it appears that she's contracted weird person herpes. She tells Brad that she isn't feeling very well and needs to leave, when suddenly a man runs straight towards the restaurant and jumps through the glass and tries to attack Rose. Brad throws the crazed man off Rose, causing him to attack and bite another customer, before Brad picks up a fire extinguisher and proceeds to extinguish the fire inside of the man's cranium. Once again, back at the hospital, as the place is now full of infected and symptoms showing patients, as they believe that they're on the verge of a full-blown epidemic that could wipe out the entirety of humanity, when suddenly a man dressed up as Santa manages to break his way out of his restraints to spread some Christmas joy, before being shot dead by two police officers who don't believe in Christmas. We then see Rose screaming in an alleyway as something terrifying appears to be coming out of her mouth, and it's not just naughty words. She then gets the attention of a concerned man who comes to try and help her, but suddenly something emerges from her face and kills the man on the spot. After helping quell the sickness that is otherwise known as the elderly, Rose then dreams that she's in some kind of hospital surrounded by nurses who have played too much Silent Hill 2 recently, as well as a little girl consuming some KFC without the F. She appears to be wearing one of the dresses that she's designed, before looking in the mirror to see that she has what can only be described as a face Ussie. She wakes up and quickly checks her mouth for any genital warts, but nothing unusual appears to be going on. And while having one of her daily food supplements, she accidentally drops it on the floor, where she learns that it's actually just a container full of blood. Well, that explains why it tasted like pennies. That night, Gunter is premiering his latest collection, including the very dress that Rose had designed, and Dr. Burrows calls to ask her to come into the clinic for an extended stay, something which she simply can't do right now, due to her dress being the one to close out the show. Chelsea, who's going to be wearing the dress to close out the show, arrives at the event looking a little under the weather, after being attacked and bitten by a ravenous old lady on the subway, but still wants to go ahead and model the outfit. Rose, who at this time is trying to look for Chelsea, is outside when her stomach pains return once again, as she's in need of a little snicky snacky snoo. After falling to the ground in complete agony, two guys then appear to begin filming the distressed woman instead of helping the distressed woman, which results in the secret pocket in the side of Rose's neck opening up, where a rather phallic looking tentacle emerges and kills one of the men. I knew it. She's got the penis neck. Brad then suddenly appears before proceeding to violently beat the other man, because how dare you look at a woman's phallic floppy parts. Seemingly unfazed by the extra appendage that's emerged from Rose, he covers it with his jacket before carrying Rose away, as the man that was killed by the tentacle appears to twist and contort before making his way back to his feet. Rose then wakes up sitting back at her seat inside of the venue, thinking that she'd once again just dreamed it all, as Brad asks her what she's doing up and tells her that they need to leave, right after having literally the best opportunity to make her leave while she was unconscious. She refuses to return to the clinic with him despite his pleas, as she sits down next to Gunter at the front of the crowd as the show begins. One of the runway models then falls off the stage after forgetting that gravity was a thing, before Chelsea attacks another one of the models, before making her way onto the stage, where she proceeds to throw two more off. Walking directly towards Gunter, she then proceeds to leap onto him before biting down into his flesh. The infected man who was killed in the alleyway earlier then walks back into the building before being shot by the police officers for the crime of looking a bit weird, before the police then shoot Chelsea too, due to their dislike of gingers. Brad then takes Rose back to the clinic, where the doctor attempts to gaslight her into thinking that it was all just a hallucination, something which doesn't seem to work, causing him to lead both of them into a dark room and locking them in. Dr. Burrows, who is now on the other side of a glass wall, tells Rose that he hired Brad to keep an eye on her when he pulled him aside that time he came to visit her, something which upsets Rose as she thinks she's been deceived by him twice now, when at this point he does genuinely care for her and wanted to keep an eye on her to just make sure she was safe. He tells her that he loves her, but she doesn't believe him, as Burrows then presses a button which opens a trapdoor above Brad's head, and like an episode of Looney Tunes or something, causes him to be covered with gallons of blood. Burrows knows exactly what he's been doing, as he knew this would happen all along. He tells Rose that what he's doing is for the betterment of mankind, and this is the next evolutionary step for humans, and that her new body is only limited by her need for blood. kinda like her old body too. Brad, slowly backing up at the prospect of being completely consumed by this little blonde girl, is then touched by something from behind. Chilling around and being thankful that it's not Jimmy Savile, he notices that it's a tentacled creature stuck to the wall. So Brad then pulls a knife out, as apparently he's from London, before Burroughs says that that's his wife. He explains that after he was unable to cure her cancer, she donated her body to him, and he created a weird Japanese cartoon tentacle creature. Rose's secret tentacle then emerges from her chest and latches onto Brad's neck, before she slices it off using his knife. But unfortunately, Brad then falls to the ground and dies, due to being a little bit of a wimp and not being able to survive a severed artery, before Burroughs tells her to feed on him. But instead of listening to the doctor, she then proceeds to put on a little show for him, as she repeatedly stabs and slashes at the disgusting creature, otherwise known as his wife. Once she's done with her, she then turns the knife onto herself to put an end to this once and for all. With Rose dead and her suffering now at an end, we then see Burroughs as he's blending up some blood and cooking some flesh before taking it to the other side of the glass, where we see that he's actually managed to keep Rose alive thanks to his regenerative treatments. So no matter what she does to herself, she can't die, she can't escape, as he holds the ability to keep her alive forever. So before we bring this video to an end, I'd like to just give a big shout out and a massive thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who go out of their way every month to continue help supporting the channel, something which I greatly appreciate. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great support to the channel, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join our private Discord server, where you can then get links to uncensored versions of all videos going forwards. So starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a big thank you to Dom Comau, Mai, Matthias, Jojo, Larry Smoke Productions, Dark Gamer HD, Die, Gavin Stevens, Zaza Lord, Marius Hawkland, Veltalum, Derek Drop, Blue Malamute, Virtually Anything Edits, Dewati, Celogram, Abhijith Nair, Helia, Caleb, Gregory, Kolak, Conrad, Ashley Taylor, Joseph Markovich, Mia, Wandering Soul, TXC0, Pineapple, Pem is in Bunhole, KJ, Dobimbo88, John McMahon, Blessed Baby, Tyler Wazensky, Derek, Mark Rapaculo, Panda Panda, and Henry the Ninja. And now making our way over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Tony Ho, Lost Gemini, Will Jenkins, Dylan, Colin Cole, V-Beats Production, Gripped, Christoph, Pascal Cathers, Dayton, John Tretolt, Speedlacer, Bloody Boy, Andrew Powell, Lolita, Winston Smart, Thomas Harris, My Wife's Son, Flareons XV, Drummond Tobias, Susanna Ostrowski, Robert Johnson, Tristan Shillingford, Salami, Cahill Husband, and Hero Bread. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.